You know, over the last 20 years, we've been looking at functional movement screens. One of the more difficult things can be, or one of the more intimidating things can be, is what to do with these scores once you get that information. So what I'm going to do today is write up an actual score and show you how we can use this information, not necessarily just to jump into corrective exercise, but to allow you to make better decisions on what this person can do regarding their entire exercise program, or decisions you may want to make regarding other tests or assessments you may do. So if we take the first person here, first score is going to be 1 on the squat, 2 on the hurdle step. We'll do a 1, 2 on the lunge, 1, 2 on shoulder, a couple of 3s for the leg raise, 2 on the push-up, a couple of 2s on rotary stability. Now, we can add these up and get a total score. So that's a 1, that's 3, that's going to be 4, that's going to be 5, 8, 10, and 12. So that gives a total score of 12. And a lot of times people just look at this total score and try to already start making assumptions. Hey, I scored an 18 on the movement screen, I'm moving great. Don't make that assumption. You could be a high score and still have significant dysfunctions. You could be an 18 and have a 0. So we can't assume too much with this total score. So we have to look at the entire movement screen and look at that entire movement profile. So we see some problems up here. The one thing we see first is the person doesn't have any pain. All the clearing tests are negative for pain. None of the movement screens cause pain, so we know we don't need to worry about sending this person right into a medical professional for pain. Now, you may want to do some other tests to see what causes these dysfunctions, but overall, we need to start by thinking the first thing we need to do is say, you know what, we should not be loading the squat, we should not be loading this lunge pattern, and we should not be doing a lot of loading overhead because they've got significant dysfunctions in those patterns. That's priority 1, is again, protect them from certain movements that are actually maybe creating bigger problems. So once we do that, create those things and create that part of the workout, we can now also look at things the person can do. The push-up looks pretty good. The hurdle step or the single leg stance is symmetrical, so that's okay. Leg raise looks pretty good. Remember that leg raise, that disassociating flexion and extending hips, this pattern and this pattern actually go together. And that's one thing about the movement screen. Most people gravitate to these top 3 patterns. Wow, the squat's bad. They immediately want to jump in and start fixing the squat pattern. Well, when you look at these top 3 patterns, these are complex movements. So the brain can compensate. They can cover up a lot of these problems. We have to look deeper, and that's why we have these bottom 4 patterns. We break the bottom 4 patterns. These break the body down, and they compartmentalize certain areas. Obviously, the shoulder looks at the upper back and the upper right and left quarters of the upper body. The leg raise looks at the hips and how well the hips and the core work together to create that disassociation. And we look at the push-up here with the bracing, looking at how well you can prevent extension, and then with rotary stability, that ability to maintain stabilization in an imbalanced and unstable situation in quadruped. So we break these patterns down here. The top 3 look at fundamental movement. So how can we use this to our advantage? Well, here's the thing. We need to start looking at how these relate. So one thing we can say immediately, well, we got a squat pattern problem, we got a lunge pattern problem. What are some of the major things that may cause those things to be an issue? Well, we could also say, hey, the hip mobility may be a problem. Well, we can look at the leg raise. Leg raise is good. We can now say, you know what? Hip mobility is probably not causing this and this. We can also look at shoulder mobility. If you've got really poor shoulder mobility, it's certainly going to affect the lunge and the squat. And what do we see here? Poor shoulder mobility. Now, the other thing we can also rule out that we want to look at, if you've got a poor lunge and a poor squat, is the ankle. So in this scenario, we probably want to also look at the ankle to see if they've got a lack of ankle mobility. If the person has a lack of ankle mobility, that could certainly be a driving factor. In this scenario, the ankle is fine. There's no ankle mobility restrictions for this individual. So what does that tell us? The driving factor for this person most likely is going to be shoulder mobility. So what we want to do is do some activities to improve shoulder mobility, whatever those may be for you. Now, how do we know they're working? Well, let's go back and recheck shoulder mobility. But let's not just recheck shoulder mobility. Let's see if our improvement in shoulder mobility has actually improved the lunge and the squat. Okay? So not just giving you one thing to do. Let's look at the entire movement screen. So hopefully by looking at all the scores and how they interact with each other and how one score may be driving the other, will give you better ideas when you start making decisions on programming.
For more information, visit functionalmovement.com.